So you painted a piece black and you're looking to top coat it now. Well, which direction do you go? That's the question. With black, it can be a little bit tricky. So today I'm going to walk through a few different methods, some tips and tricks to help you figure that out. Kind of show you methods on what to do, how to do it, and then actually the final result, maybe to help you choose. So if this is something you're looking forward to, stay tuned today on Wise Owl Paint Party. All right, so with black, you have actually a few different options that you can go with. And I'm actually gonna show you, brush them on, show you the final results, and walk through just how I would do it and a couple little tips and tricks along the way. So what are you gonna need? So if you were to use our salve, you would need a 2-inch palm brush, and I highly recommend one of these. This is what I use for pretty much all of my salving. It's a great brush to get large areas, which is what you'd be doing with the salve as a top coat. So this is what you'd use for that. Additionally, what's really cool is if you're using a solid black color on a piece of furniture, you could also simply top coat with our black wax. And I'll show you what that's gonna look like too. So I just grabbed the one wax brush I have. I usually use our Wise Owl Premium brushes for any waxing that I'm doing. This one's usually just a detail brush, but I might still just go ahead and use it for this simple sample board we have here. So black wax, if you choose to do that. And then the next couple are gonna be the fun ones. The ones that probably people are really gonna wanna watch this video for, and that is using varnish only, and then tinting your varnish with that black to change it ever so slightly. And I'll walk through a little bit more about that once we get there. So we're gonna walk through each step. So we're gonna start with our salve here, so you can kind of see what that looks like. Our black wax here, our matte varnish here, and then our matte varnish tinted at the very end. So you can kind of see how the color actually changes, because anytime you add something to our chalk synthesis paint that's a top coat that has any kind of sheen to it, it's going to alter the color a little bit. So it's going to have that reflectivity that you're going to see, or the reflection of any light that is around you. Whereas if you're using our salves or waxes, it's going to be a very matte, non-reflective surface, which is really, really cool. So it just depends on the look you're going for. And then we also have a satin varnish, which would be the same exact method, and our OHE clear coats will be the same method as well. So I'm not going to show all of those. We just picked one. We're going to use matte varnish to kind of give you an idea with that. So what I'm going to do, highly likely, is I'm going to kind of angle it down to the little square that I'm working on, do one section at a time, just kind of talk through what I'm doing, why I'm doing it that way, and then show you the final result. All right, so first up is going to be salve. We have scented salves, and we also have an unscented salve. And that's pretty much what I use for most of my top coating anytime I'm looking for a wax-like top coated surface. And what the salve is going to give you is just this absolutely stunningly matte finish with something that's going to be strong and long lasting. And again, just look beautiful. I love that matte finish, especially when you're using a chalk style paint, because it starts matte and it'll end matte. Now you can add sheen as you add the varnishes and one hour enamel and clear coats, but if you're looking for a straight matte finish, our salves and waxes are the way to go. We're gonna start with unscented hemp salve. So what I have is my 2-inch palm brush, and then I have the quart size, because I use it a lot, of the unscented hemp salve. And you're going to use it for top coating mostly. So you're really going to want to be able to have, a good generous amount. You can also get them in these smaller size tins, and again, in all the different other kind of scents that you might want. I have my 2-inch palm, and this is going to be the easiest top coating you've ever done. So what we're going to do is just simply dip it into my can, get a good amount on there. You don't have to get a lot, just enough that it covers kind of the last little bits of the 2-inch palm brush, and then you're just going to brush on. And what's cool about the salve is, and look at how quickly that changes color. It's amazing. The good thing about the salve is it just goes on so easy. And you're not gonna have to worry about, like with some traditional waxes where it'll kind of sit on the surface and not really penetrate the paint. What the salve is doing is penetrating the paint and becoming basically one with the paint itself. And because it's doing that, I can go in streaks, I can go in circles. It's not gonna matter because it's not gonna just sit on top of the paint. It's actually gonna penetrate into the paint. And I just wanna leave that there for a second. I mean, look at how cool that is, right? You got painted, nothing else, and then top coated. You can see how that rich, deep, dark black just pops. And it's amazing. Now, right now it looks wet, has some sheen to it, but as it dries, it's gonna just, all that wet look is gonna go away. And I'll show you a little bit more after I finish top coating it. I'm gonna wipe it away. But this is, I mean, when I found salve, I couldn't believe it. After having used traditional waxes for a couple of years and dealt with the frustration of the streaks that are caused with the wax not penetrating the paint right or going on uneven, you'll never have to worry about that with salve. You're just gonna brush it in, make sure it gets into the paint, penetrates into the paint. And that's one of the things, using it on our chalk style paint, it's porous. So it's gonna want to absorb, you know, the hemp oil, all the waxes that are integrated into our salves. And then once it does that, dries and cures, it's gonna be really durable. Now, it's not gonna be as durable as our varnish or one of our enamel clear coats, but this is definitely something that could be used for daily use. High traffic areas, it definitely would go another route. But I use this on a lot of pieces. I've used it on tops of dressers, you know, stuff that's not gonna get, like tabletops, things like that. Kids are gonna beat it up, probably wanna go a different route, but like I said, I've used this on top of dressers and had no problems at all with about daily use, with as long as it's not really hardcore, you know, kids slamming stuff on it kind of thing. But that's all there is to it. I mean, look at how absolutely stunning that is. And you can see how the black just comes right out from where it was before. So that's all you're gonna do. You can do it in pretty generous size sections because the open time for this is very long, because it's hemp oil based. But with that, it's going to be stronger. So the one caveat to using our salve and or waxes, they're hemp oil based, so they will take a little bit more time to cure, to dry and then cure. So I'd say about a week for it to dry, and then of course after that the cure time starts, just like a traditional wax would. But for this, it takes a little bit more time for it to dry. And in that drying time, you're gonna see some streaks through it because it's gonna start like this and end up being a black matte finish. So through that time frame where it's drying, those streaks will show where it's, the streaky parts is where it's wet. So it's like when you paint and parts of the paint is still wet and you can see how it has reflectivity and it looks different and it looks streaky, but then it all dries and it's beautiful and flat and perfect one color like this. It's the same concept with the top coat. It just goes on so much easier. So you're gonna take your shop towel, and this was an old piece of plywood, so it's probably not a little bit of a rough surface for me to be wiping on. Normally you have a nice, perfectly flat surface that you're wiping on. This is all you're gonna do. You're gonna wipe it away until it takes some of that wet look away, right? It's still gonna look a little wet, and you can buff it more again after. But initially, we're just gonna wipe away as much of this wet look as possible, right? And I do this with a shop towel initially because it's gonna take on quite a bit more of that wet hemp oil to the shop towel. And then if I come back to buff out any more of it later, I'll get a microfiber lint-free cloth, and that works amazing for that secondary buff. But if you use that microfiber for this initial step, it'll get really wet, and then, you know, it just, I don't know, it gets so wet, you're not gonna be able to continue to use it. You're gonna have to wash it more. So I only use it for that secondary buff, and I'll tell you about that here in a second. So we're just gonna keep doing this until we get it as much of that wet look away as possible. Just keep pulling and keep pulling and keep pulling until we get as much of it off, right? And then I'll give it about 24 hours usually, and I'll come back with that microfiber lint-free cloth, and then I'll just buff it out real good. Kind of like back in the day when I used to shine my boots in the military, same exact concept. You know, you're gonna get that initial wax on, then you're gonna come back and buff it to give it that nice little sheen or shine or whatever you wanna call it. Although this is really not gonna give it much shine to it. It's gonna stay very matte, especially once it cures and hardens. It's gonna have a beautiful matte finish. So this is what you're gonna get. I'll probably come back and buff it before I show you guys the final and give it a couple of days to dry so you can actually see what it looks like in comparison to what the other steps that we're about to take. So next up is going to be black wax. I'm gonna have that right next to the salve so you can actually see the difference and how they all tie in together. All right, so next up is gonna be our black wax. So it's gonna give it pretty much the same look because ultimately this is black, but it might deepen it just that little bit. And you'll see what I mean. I'm gonna peel the tape off. You can see kind of the differences between all of them, but it's just another way, another thing, another option that Wise Owl gives you to go ahead and top coat your black paint. So I have a 1.5 inch Wise Owl premium brush, and then I have my black Hemp Oil furniture wax. So again, the hemp oil based, brush it on, wipe it off, let it dry, come back and buff it out with a microfiber lint-free cloth, same as we were doing before. So we're just gonna go ahead and get it on here and I'll show you what it's gonna look like. And I'm using, this is a kind of a small brush for this area. I probably would grab one of our rounds for this, but I already had it out and I was using it for my sample board I was practicing on for this video, and I decided just to keep it and use it. But you can see it's just adding that same hemp oil wax base with a little bit of that black pigment to it. So it might deepen and darken the black, maybe just a little bit. Our chalk synthesis paint in black is very black, as you already saw from step one with the salve. So it's not like you can deepen it a whole lot further, as it is already pretty black, but this is just another something that you can do if you're feeling like you want to give it something even that much deeper, even if it is just a little bit. So you're just going to brush this on. Now, normally this is something I'd use as an accenting wax, but I do like to do it over dark colors, which will just deepen that color really well. So even if you were to do it over, let's say, you know, carbon or inkwell as an example, and you paint it on and then wipe it off, it's not going to stay and stick and cause this single color coverage like it does with the black, because it's the same color, but it'll deepen and darken those colors really beautifully. If you just decided, I'm only going to top coat with black and that's it, I'm not going to put anything else on it, and you just go straight into that and just cover the whole thing and then wipe off, it's a pretty cool look. And first time I ever did it was with Abyss when I first started using Wise Owl, and I absolutely love how it deepened and darkened that really beautiful blue-green color. All right, so we're gonna get this on everywhere, just like so. And that, again, took a little bit longer because we have a smaller brush. But we do have round brushes, different sizes that you can use. And you could use that 2-inch palm brush as well if that was a little bit easier to do. So again, I'm gonna take my shop towel, I'm gonna fold it into 1/8 just because it's a little easier to work with, and then I can fold it back over and use another area that's not so wet. And you'll see with this, it's gonna be a little bit more wet and taking on the pigment. So instead of mushing more pigment around or more wax around, I'm going to just fold it back over and have it like this, and we're going to continue wiping away. And as we're wiping, just like we did with the salve, we're kind of massaging and rubbing this salve or wax, hemp oil based, into the paint. So it's becoming one with the paint, not just sitting on top of the paint. And that's what that bond that it makes is what makes it so strong for a wax. So here we go. So we're just going to continue to wipe this back just like we did the salve until it's as dry looking as possible. You're not going to get it completely dry just by wiping it back. You're going to need to let it dry for a day at least. And then come back and buff it out. And then after that, it might take another day or two to actually dry completely. And it will be wet to the touch. So you're going to want to make sure, obviously, before, if you're selling these pieces, you know, make sure it's not letting any more of the wax off onto your fingers. But that's one of the things, like I mentioned in the first step, salve and wax for hemp oil base. So it's going to take a little longer to dry than a traditional wax because it doesn't have those nasty chemicals in there that help it dry quicker. It's all very natural, green, safe to use, safe to have in your house, safe to use on everything really, product. So with that, the one thing you're going to have is that it takes a little longer to dry. All right, so there we go. So this is going to be our black hemp oil furniture wax, and you can see just as easy as it was with the salve. Simply brush it on, wipe it back. You'll come back about a day or two later, buff out any wet spots you still have, any streakiness you still have, and then give it, I don't know, 2-3 more days after that for it to dry. And then it'll be that same normal 30 to 45 day window for full cure time. And that's it for that. And next up, we're gonna hit varnish, and we're gonna do varnish in 2 different ways. We're gonna do just straight varnish, show you how to lay down varnish to make it look beautiful without having any streaks and stuff in it. And then the little tip and trick is going to be to tint your varnish with that same color. And of course, we're doing black, so I'm going to tint it with black. I'm going to show you exactly how I do it. I'm going to mix it and actually paint it on, and then you're going to get to see the difference. So it's very minimal, I'll be honest with you. Some people like to do it, some people don't, but I wanted to share how I do it, how it looks, so you can see if you're brushing on the varnish right, streaks in your brush strokes and stuff like that should not be an issue, and I'll walk through how to do that. But if you're worried about that, the tinting thing is something that will help a little bit, although it's not really going to change the color a whole lot because it already is black. As I said, from salve to black wax, still just black. So these will be 2 other ways just to kind of show you methods to top coat black paint. All right, so next up is going to be top coating with our matte varnish. So what I use for that is our Klingon F50. It's pretty much what I use for any time I'm priming or varnishing a top coat onto a space, whether it's flat or a detailed area. Unless it's really small details, I'll use this guy. For me, I just like how much of the varnish it holds. You'll see why in a second. And then the spread it gives once I go flat. So you'll push it and it'll flatten and spread, and I have a nice even spread because the flat brush there's just a ton of filaments packed in here. So, and it works amazingly well. So the biggest trick with varnish is getting enough on, brushing it everywhere it needs to go, feathering it, and walking away and not messing with it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems people have with the streaking issue is you see streaks because you overwork it, and that reflectivity that is there is the contrast of light. So if you have a dark color, which is why a lot of people have problems top coating with varnish over a dark color, is because you have that. So you're putting the varnish on top of a dark color. So the varnish ultimately will be a lighter color because it's pushing and holding and reflecting light, right? Whereas these, once they dry, it's not going to reflect any light. Light's going to hit it and just die. So if it's going to reflect light, it's going to reflect everything. So every little stroke, every little bump, every little everything you're going to see. And that's the tricky part about top coating dark colors like a black, which is why we're kind of walking through different methods you can use. So the very first one for something that's a little bit more durable than you would have for salve or a wax would be our varnish. And like I said, I know people have some issues with this just because it dries really fast, and a lot of times people don't put enough on and they overwork it. So first, get enough on, brush it everywhere it needs to go in small areas at a time, and then feather it in and don't touch it. Let gravity do its work. It self-levels amazingly well if you have enough product. And that's the thing. If you brush a teeny tiny little thin coat and then you go over it twice, like brush on and then feather, by the time you're getting to feathering, you're already putting brush strokes through your varnish, because you have such a thin amount, it's already starting to dry by the time you get back to the beginning part of whatever section you're doing. So if I did a section like this is small, I could probably do this whole board in one time, right? Get all the varnish on and then feather, and done. That's it. But if you don't have enough product, by the time I brushed it on and they go to start feathering, by the time I get back to feathering, it's already starting to dry. So that's the biggest thing. Get enough product on. It dries crystal clear. It's gonna go on this kind of milky, cloudy color, but don't fret over that, because I think that might be another thing. People are not putting more on. They're thinking I gotta go thin because it's gonna stay cloudy. It will not stay cloudy. It'll dry crystal clear. You don't have to worry about that, but you have to get enough on to be able to brush it and then feather it and then be done. So I'm gonna walk through exactly what I mean and you'll see just how it goes on. So I have stirred my varnish. You do not, I repeat, do not shake your varnish. It will have bubbles all through it and it will cause all kinds of problems because those bubbles will transfer because it dries that fast. So I'm going to get my brush in here, and with these Klingons, it holds a lot. So you don't want to just dip and come back. You want to dip and kind of play with it for a second, make sure it's holding enough for the section that you're doing. If I was doing a larger section, I would probably go further up my brush. But for this, just right down to the tips, I think I'm going to have enough to cover this whole area, okay? And I'm going to bring it over and I'm going to brush it on really quick, get it all over. And I think I'm going to go side to side maybe. No, I'm probably going to go front to back. Let's go front to back. So I'm going to get it all on here. This is the brushing it on part. I'm brushing it on, getting it on how it needs to be there really quick. Make sure I get all the edges down through here. And now I'm going to feather. So I'm going to feather, 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 feather. Now imagine if I had a thin coat of this and I started feathering and I came back to it. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to mess with it no more. You're going to have the urge to. You're going to want to. You're going to see this. You're going to see that. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I got to go touch that. I got to go fix this. Oh, little thing fell in my varnish. You're going to want to touch. Don't. I promise you don't. Because you're going to mess it up. You're going to leave brush strokes. It's going to cause problems. And you're just going to have to sand it back and do it all over again anyways. Just let it do its thing. And if you don't trust me, try a little sample board in your garage, paint something, varnish, brush on, feather over, walk away, and watch the magic happen as it flattens and self-levels amazingly well. And once you do that, you're done. So this is all I'm going to do. Looking at it, looks pretty good. Looks like I covered everything. But just know, more than likely, you're going to do at least 2 coats, no matter what. So if you did miss a spot, or if you did have like a bug or a piece of lint or something fall in there, wait for it to dry, get the little lint or whatever off, and then do your second coat to hit that spot you missed, or fix the little spot where you had to dig the little piece of lint out. I've had it happen to me before. It's so much easier just to let it dry and have it flick right off than it is to try to dig through wet varnish, and then you're leaving fingerprints and all kinds of nonsense everywhere. So just brush it on, feather in, walk away, and it will show amazing results, I promise. So this is another method, and if you're still having trouble brushing it on, another way to help with the reflectivity of those brush strokes is tinting your varnish. something I've seen people do before, had lots of questions. People were like, Mark, can you do that? How do you do that? What's the way? What is the result? So today I'm going to show you. So that's going to be the next step. I'm actually going to get a tray, pour some varnish in it, tint it right here in front of you so you can see how much I put in there. Don't necessarily measure it, but it's just kind of a roundabout idea of, okay, just enough, and you'll see what I mean here in a minute. So I'm going to let this dry, not mess with this area for a little bit, and then we'll come back. We will mix varnish with a little bit of our black paint, and then we'll paint it on. We'll let all of this dry, peel the tape, and then show you the final results, and then help you, hopefully help you pick a top coat that you will use for your black painted finish in the future. All right, and last but not least, varnish with a little bit of tinting of your black chalk synthesis paint. So pretty simple stuff, probably 5 to 10%. I probably wouldn't go as high as 10. I'd probably do about 5% of black paint to varnish. So normally I'll have a bigger tray. I got my tray out, but it's usually filled a little bit more because I'm doing a bigger space if I was to do this. Since we have a smaller one, I just have a little small amount. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a little bit of my black paint and I'm just gonna drizzle it in here. And like I said, I'd say anywhere from 5 to 10%, somewhere in that neighborhood. And what you're gonna end up with, I'll show you here on camera, is gonna be like this gray, milky, and you're probably gonna be like, what the heck? Just gotta remember, the milkiness goes away in our varnish. It turns crystal clear. So whatever pigment we're gonna add to it, so we're gonna add black to it right here, is all that's gonna be left. So we're just gonna take, I'm using the same brush I used on the previous step. So I'm gonna make sure I get the varnish that's still in there incorporated through. And we're just gonna mix. And the biggest thing is don't go mashing through to mix it. Don't shake it to mix it. Just gently rub your brush through it to incorporate the black paint into the varnish. And don't mush it around too much because you don't want those bubbles. And that's the same thing like we talked about with shaking. Bubbles are bad. You don't want bubbles. So I'm just kind of mashing it around, making sure I incorporate it fully into it. I might have had just a little bit more than I needed to of the paint, but you're gonna get the idea. Using such a small amount, it's kind of hard to measure it out exactly. But if you're gonna look for it to be this grayish carbon-like color, right? And I think I got that incorporated really good. And then we're gonna paint that on. So why would you do this? Why am I doing this? Why have people asked me about doing this? What happens when you paint on a varnish is it has reflectivity, and that reflectivity shows brush strokes. So if you're having a tough time brushing on varnish and you wanna reduce the brush strokes are probably still going to be there because you're not really improving your technique on how you're getting it on. But if you want to reduce the brush strokes that you can see, you reduce the reflectivity a little bit. And how you do that is by adding the color, right? So if those brush strokes have black in them and the base coat is black, the reflectivity of what's showing is now, instead of being clear and reflective, it's more black. So you can see how it's not necessarily improving what you're doing, but it's helping what you're doing, if that makes sense. So you really want to improve on your technique on how you're putting down the varnish, as we did in the previous step. But if you're still having trouble, this is another method, another tip or trick you can use. So I think I got that incorporated in there real good. Now I'm going to make sure I get enough on my brush. It's going to be the same concept. I'm going to get enough on my brush to be able to do the whole area all at once. So we're gonna brush it on. You're gonna see the open time might be a little bit longer because you have the paint in there, but not much. I'm gonna brush it on, get it all over real quick. So again, brush on, feather, walk away. Same concept. So I'm gonna hurry up and get this on. And I'm painting over plywood, so it's kind of a pain in the butt a little bit, It has some rough edges and stuff like that to it, but it was a good size sample board to be able to do all this for you guys. Okay, so there, I got it brushed on. Now I'm gonna feather. Nice, gently over the top, feather it out. Nice, gently over the top, feather it out. Same method you did in the previous one, except we've now tinted the varnish the same color as the base coat, which will allow for any brush strokes you might have to now reflect that black color instead of clear, crystal clear, which will have that contrast between your base coat and the top coat is such a contrast that any reflectivity you're gonna have from light is gonna show more. Now with it tinted, you might not. So if you're still struggling with brushing on a varnish, this is just another way to go. So that looks good. But that's all there is to it. I mean, it's really simple. The biggest thing is not putting too much paint. You just want to tint it just enough. So I'd say probably 5%, I would say. Somewhere between 5 and 10%, definitely no more than 10%. It's not gonna look black, and you can see it looks black now going on, and it dries is gonna be more black, but in your tray, it's gonna be more of our carbon colored. It's gonna be a really, really dark gray, so don't freak out. Again, the varnish is cloudy, milky color, it dries crystal clear. So the only thing that's gonna be left is the pigment that's within. So within our varnish, there is no pigment, so it dries crystal clear. If you add pigment, the pigment of whatever color you add is what's gonna be left. And that's why it allows for a little bit more leeway in your technique brushing on the varnish, doing it with this method. So we're gonna let that dry. I'm gonna peel some tape after everything dries and show you the end results. Okay, so here we are with our finished product. And as you can see, starting from the left going to the right, we have our unscented hemp salve. And of course, if you're new to Wise-Owl paint, the paint does not show its true color until it's top coated. So you can kind of see the stripes down the middle where the tape was, is actually showing a more gray carbon looking color. And it's just simply because the color will be a little desaturated as it's painted on and dried, because it's a chalk style paint. And then when you add the top coat, that saturation, especially for our chalk synthesis paints, the saturation of color is absolutely amazing. And it just deepens and darkens the color. So you can see we have a really beautiful black with the unscented hemp salve. It's a beautiful matte finish, as I mentioned in the video, just perfect, no reflectivity, exactly as you would want from a traditional wax, but made way easier finish. And then moving on, we have the next one is going to be that black hemp oil furniture wax. And as you might be able to tell, it's just a hair darker. Not much, but just a little bit. And that's why I wanted to show our black is definitely a beautiful black color. And adding the black hemp oil furniture wax will seal and give it just even that more saturation of that black. Continuing that same matte finish that you would want from anything that you're doing with a chalk style finish, that you want to keep the matte finish intact. So really beautiful, both sides turned out absolutely amazing. And you can kind of see from that perspective, going with a matte finish, this is what you're gonna get. Now, moving on to our varnished sides, you can already tell right away the reflectivity that's there. You can see it looks a little bit lighter in color, especially this one. This is gonna be the varnish only, right? And you can definitely tell looking at all four side by side, the reflectivity of this is so much so that it's making the color look lighter. Now, with that said, that reflectivity is also allowing for it to show, see these imperfections in the plywood? These streaks is not my brush strokes, it's actually the plywood has like rigidy spots. And I kind of did that intentionally because I wanted you to be able to see that it's not as much technique driven as it is, well, I should say it is technique driven. on why your paint would show brush strokes or not. So you can see up here where I laid it down just as I showed, it's beautiful, flat, perfect, no problems. But where the plywood had the raised areas, it shows everything because it has that reflectivity within the varnish, and you can see it. You can see the light reflecting off of it, the white from my ring light reflecting off of it, right? So that's why it is very much technique driven, laying down your varnish. If you lay it down flat and just as I showed in the video, that's what you'll get. If you don't and it has brush strokes in it, kind of like what you see with the textured, or hard spots on the plywood, that's what you're gonna get from going over it, anything like that. So that's just varnish. Now moving over one, you can absolutely see that slight difference in the reflectivity. Now the black is still black. So in all these, it's the same black color, except maybe this one a little bit just because we added some black, but same. The only difference between these is gonna be that reflectivity that's there or not, right? Because ultimately this is a base coat of black with varnish tinted with that same base coat. So the varnish goes on, the varnish dries and dries crystal clear. So the only thing that's left is the pigment from what you tinted it with, which allows for it to be a little less reflective. Now you can see it's still reflective. You can see some of the light still shining through as you go up and down, but it's just a little bit darker, right? Because it has that tinted color, which will, again, allow for you to get by with any imperfections you might have. So you can see the little imperfections in the plywood. There's some in here too. You just don't see it because that tinted color is not allowing for that contrast from black to the light in the reflections that would show. So that's why tinting is kind of a neat little trick if you're not as comfortable laying down varnish on flat surfaces, especially, and getting those brush strokes that will cause the same kind of effect where those brush strokes will reflect and show the contrast between the colors, especially on dark colors like black. So you can see the difference. It's a little darker, it's a little bit more matte finish than it would be if it was just the matte varnish, and definitely just a hair darker. So going all the way across, you can see you got 4 different ways that you can top coat our dark colors. So we have unscented hemp salve, black hemp oil furniture wax, varnish by itself, and then varnish tinted with the color. Really cool stuff. I thought this would be a fun video to share, especially knowing that I've had this question quite a bit on how to top coat dark colors, especially with the varnish. And I figured I'd just add in all of them together so you could see several different options of things that you can do. And there you have it, top coating our black chalk synthesis paint. This is a video I've been asked for quite a bit on how to use that varnish tinting trick. And then I figured I'd add in some other options for you guys to try to really help you narrow down what you want to do. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe, please share, and if you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. And if you're looking for any of our Wise-All paint products, in the video description below, I'll have the link to find the Wise-All retailer nearest you. Hope everybody has a blessed day, and as always, happy painting.